So, hello and welcome to the 785th meeting of the Economic Club of New York. I'm Barbara Van Allen, President and CEO of the club, and it's a pleasure to see all of you here. We also have a number of folks attending virtually today. Before we begin, I want to extend a warm welcome to students joining us virtually from Princeton, Fordham, and Mercer University. The Economic Club of New York is proud to stand as the nation's leading nonpartisan platform for discussions on economic, social, and political issues. And for more than a century, actually today, I think about 118 years, the Economic Club has been a platform for thought leaders and dialogue on topics across a broad range. Today, we're privileged to continue that tradition with our distinguished guest, Lionel Barber, a journalist of great distinction. Lionel's best known for his tenure as editor of the Financial Times from 2005 to 2020. During his editorship, he transformed the FT into a leading global news organization, emphasizing digital integration and expanding its readership by over 1 million paying subscribers, with more than 75% being digital. Lionel began his journalism career in 1978 at The Scotsman, later joining the Sunday Times as a business correspondent. In 1985, he moved to the Financial Times, serving in various roles, including Washington correspondent, Brussels bureau chief, news editor, European editor, and the US managing editor. Throughout his career, he's interviewed numerous global leaders, such as US Presidents Barack Obama and Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. An accomplished author, his memoir, The Powerful and the Damned, Private Diaries in Turbulent Times, was published in 2020. And we welcome him today as part of the club's author series to discuss his latest work, Gambling Man, the Wild Ride of Japan's Masayoshi Son. Today's program will be a fireside chat. We're honored to have member and former club chair Glenn Hubbard as our moderator. Glenn is the Dean Emeritus and Russell Carson Professor of Finance and Economics at Columbia University. As a reminder, the discussion is on the record. We're going to end promptly at 1, but we will leave time for a few questions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Lionel Barber and Glenn Hubbard.
Let's see, I think they want me over there for some reason. Good afternoon, everybody. I will do a quick Oprah Winfrey moment and just remind you, you have this book, which is a wonderful read. I certainly commend it to everybody. Barbara gave a great introduction of Lionel already, but I just want to remind you how fun it is to read what he writes. In an era long before ChatGPT, he was one of the FT's best editors, and this book is truly phenomenal. So, Lionel, I wanted to begin, if I might, with a why. I want to get to who this guy is, Masayoshi Son, and what it is he's done that's so interesting. But let me start with a why. Why did you write this book? You know, as Barbara was saying, you have interviewed the mighty, the political leaders of our age. Why this guy?
Let me just say, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you, Barbara, for the invitation. Glenn, thank you very much for the interview. The answer to your direct question is money. Now, that's not because I'm hoping to become a worldwide bestseller, but because Masayoshi Son is someone who has literally made or lost hundreds of billions of dollars. He was the richest man in the world for 3 days at the height of the dot-com bubble in February 2000. And in my experience in journalism, follow the money. If there's money around, there's got to be a lot of good stories. Now, there is one other reason. the Financial Times was purchased by Nikkei in 2015. 44 times earnings, Glenn.
God bless.
God bless.
Yeah.
I never saw a red cent, but
Yeah.
there we are. But I became much more interested in Japan as a result of I did 14 trips in 4 years to cement the relationship between the Japanese and the FT. And I kept hearing about this figure, Masayoshi Son. And in their own way, one or two of the Nikkei people said, you should look at this guy. Do lunch with the FT. But he was always elusive. So when I thought about a biography, I thought of Masa, as he's known.
Well, it's very interesting. What do you want readers to take away from the book? Is it about him as a disruptor, about disruptors in general? What's the big takeaway that you want us to have?
One is understand that entrepreneurs, great entrepreneurs, are not fearful of failure. That may actually be part of risk-taking implies failure. And this is a great story of someone who keeps bouncing back. In that, I think, maybe here in this country, we're accustomed to failure, but also
They're not
bouncing
in Japan.
back.
No, that's very rare.
In Japan, it's
Right.
very rare because failure, actually getting things wrong, is, akin to monumental mistakes, humiliation. The whole culture is sort of built against that. So I think, first of all, it tells you it's an entrepreneurial tale, coming back from the corporate dead, so to speak. But also, it's a story of our times, the last 40 years, where you've seen this incredible technological wave from the microchip to the birth of the internet, to mobile internet, to now AI. This guy, Masayoshi Son, has been there or thereabouts. I mean, Glenn, you were saying in the green room, he's a sort of Zelig figure.
That's right, he's everywhere.
He's like that. I'd say he's Forrest Gump, sort of meets Zelig.
Yeah.
He's always around. He's either trying to buy the companies that are at the heart of the action or buy a slice of them. And he's done it from, Alibaba to Arm Holdings. He was in NVIDIA, sold that. And he's lost and made, fortunes. Been the biggest investor in China, foreign investor in China and in America. So for all these reasons, I think it's fair to say he's a consequential investor of our times.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about the who, because you have a fascinating description of what makes this man. Here's a guy who's born in 1957 to, at the time, a poor Korean immigrant. And of course, Japan is not always welcoming. You go through the logic of which name. Should he have a Korean name? Should he have a Japanese name? His immigrant father then gets rich running pachinko parlors, of all things. Son has a bad illness. He has all this drive. What's he like? As you were writing about him as a person, how do you think about this kind of a person?
Very important to understand that Masayoshi Son is an outsider. He's still viewed as an outsider amongst the corporate elite because he is Korean. He's Korean Japanese. His grandfather came to Japan from Korea in 1917. His grandmother, who was quite a bit younger than his grandfather, came in around 1927. So they were immigrants when Korea was part of the Japanese empire. They were colonial citizens, and they were economic migrants who took Japanese aliases because that was a way of fitting in. But they were literally fourth-class citizens. They did quite well until the war. We know it was an annihilation catastrophe. So 1945-6, they went back to Korea but were treated appallingly, and so they went back to Japan. Destitution for the next 10 years. Father started a bootlegger, then he went into loan sharking, then he went into pachinko, and by 1960, early 1960s, Japanese economy is recovering, and they're actually quite well off. So although Masa likes to tell everybody that he grew up in a slum and he was really poor, that was actually quite a short time. But crucially, then I'll stop, crucially Masa makes a big decision, which is to leave Japan and go to America to seek an education at briefly high school and then college. And he gets into Berkeley in the 1970s, and learns English properly, learns about the technological revolution, microchip, and then goes back to Japan with that English advantage and builds from nothing a software distribution business and becomes a middleman between America and Asia.
You've just told, and you tell in the book, this great story of him as a person and how he grew up. Can you connect that for us to his risk-taking? So I think of the scene, for example, in the musical Hamilton, the duet between Burr and Hamilton, where it becomes clear that Burr wants to be a little bit less of a risk-taker. He's got more to lose. He's got some privilege. Hamilton doesn't. Is there a link between Son's willingness to just play 52-card pickup and take huge bets and this upbringing you've just mentioned?
I think there is, Glenn, because the way to think about this is if you start with nothing and you lose everything, you just go back to where you were.
Right.
And I think that's the way he kind of looks at things. He's also got an incredible self-belief that he's right. And so even when he's wiped out, 97% of his paper wealth wiped out during the dot-com bubble, and his attitude is, now's the time to buy, because I'm right about the general direction with my technocentric vision. But he does have, I think the phrase used to me by an American investor friend was the great balls of St. James. And by the way, that's not physical anatomy. That's actually, that's a piece of furniture.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So tell us a little bit more about that, because if you say he has this insight, he's not a technical whiz, really. No. He's not somebody of great financial acumen particularly. So what is it that gives him this special insight?
I think he understands, he's very creative in the application of technology. So he will, for example, talk about the kind of picks and shovels in the internet infrastructure. So he's not, as you say, he's not Steve Jobs, although we can come to that. He had a very close relationship with Steve Jobs and got exclusive distribution of the iPhone.
Which is great.
You know, great. So he is somebody who is, first of all, a middleman. I can explain to you, Mr. Bobby Kotick, you, Bill Gates, you want to get into the mass consumer market in Japan. I'm the guy. I can unlock the black box of distribution. I can be your cultural interpreter. He's that, but he's also somebody who will say, well, I can understand telecoms infrastructure. I can figure out a way of disrupting incumbents, which he does with NTT. I can see that mobile is coming. I can see an undervalued brand. I'll buy it. I know about, we can come to this, financial engineering, leverage, low interest rate environment for Japan for 3 decades. All these things is what makes him different and special with a giant risk appetite.
So I agree with that. And I want to come to some of those deals in a moment, but when you look back, I think, what's this guy going to be remembered for? Is it as an investor, a capital allocator, a marketer, a disruptor, Sisyphus? How are we going to think about him if 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
We'll definitely think about him as a man who got 1 or 2 giant bets right. So when he met Jack Ma in 1999 in Beijing, and he's in a little group of investors, Chinese investors, and he's the guy against everyone in that group who says, I can smell the horse flesh, so to speak. This guy's got it, Jack Ma. I'm putting in not just 20, I'm going to put in 80 million, 100 million overall in a matter of months, just before, the market correction, and I'm sticking with it. And he gets Alibaba right. He does not sell like Goldman. So that's right. He got Yahoo right too. Second, I think he would be seen as an empire builder. If you think of the telecoms empire that he built, he did manage to disrupt and beat NTT in the mobile game, and then he buys Sprint. Everybody thought that was a disaster, he should sell. He stuck with it, and then he created a third force in the American telecoms market. So I think that was a big success. And then, I suppose the other thing, just a parochial point here, Glenn, he bought Britain's best technology company for a song.
ARM,
Everybody
yeah.
thought ARM Holdings, 30 billion, middle of Brexit, there's no government in Britain, and he basically got that company in 15 days. And it's now not worth 30 billion, it's probably worth about 140 billion. And it is the platform for all his ambitions in the AI space.
Well, that was a fascinating story now that you mentioned it, because I remember that he's trying to take a helicopter to get on the chairman of the board's yacht, except the yacht wasn't palatial enough to accommodate said helicopter. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well,
how does he twist the arms to make it happen?
It's classic. I mean, Masa will just overwhelm you with either the big promise of more money. I mean, he says to Jerry Yang of Yahoo at one point, you need 100 million. And Jerry Yang says, no, I don't need 100 million. And Masa looks at him and says, everybody needs 100 million. And if you don't take it, I'm going to give it to your competitor. And so he does similar steamroller tactics with the chairman of ARM, who's this quite, nice guy, English guy, spent a bit of time in Japan. He gets this call, and Masa says, I want to meet you. And Masa thinks, well, you're in the middle of the Bosphorus in the Mediterranean. I mean, I'll just fly my helicopter on your boat. And he obviously thinking it's some kind of, Russian oligarch's super yacht. And the poor English guy's just got a sloop, but they meet in Marmaris, and, Masa just hits him with a big cash offer, unconditional, and then makes 2 or 3 other offers, and that's it. Wham, bam, thank you, man.
Now, you mentioned some of the deals. I want to go into that. So Yahoo, $20 million for 30%, 1995. That sounds pretty good to me. You talked about Alibaba, Vodafone and mobile telephony, ARM, also Coupang, Didi, DoorDash, ByteDance, and WeWork in there too.
I was wondering where we were going to come from. WeWork.
How does he, I actually worked with Adam Newman, so this is a case I know pretty well, but how does he do this? How does he spot these particular deals? And then I want to come to alpha, beta, or something else. So let's talk about the nose.
I think he does go a lot on instinct, and I think he suffers from what I call founder syndrome. So if he meets somebody else who talks as big as he does, and Adam Newman, as you know, and the Financial Times, by the way, made him Boldness in Business Champion of the Year in, I think, 2015. So it was the only time I met him. I sat next to him and I thought, he talks big.
And he has better hair than Masa, too.
He's definitely got a lot. Masa's sort of follically challenged, I think. And he believes Adam Newman when Adam Newman says, I'm going to build the biggest real estate leasing company in the world, and I've got a techno kind of gloss on this. And Masa just keeps piling the money in. And when people around him challenge him, and that there weren't that many people, by the way, inside the company who were prepared to challenge him. But as he's getting deeper and deeper into WeWork, they say, you got to get out, you got to stop. It's not worth 47 billion. Masa says, that's what everybody said about Alibaba. And I was right. So he does get these things wrong. And I think when he raised, and we'll probably come to this, he raises $98.6 billion for the SoftBank Vision Fund to disrupt the whole venture capital industry. Essentially, he's got too much money. He's force-feeding companies. There's no discipline. So I think that was a very bad episode. It's why I don't think he will necessarily be regarded as one of the great technological investors, certainly not traders.
Well, on those bets that I mentioned, are we observing alpha or beta? Is he simply, is he able to pick things, or were times hot and he was just in the right place at the right time as sailing?
I think he's a bit more than kind of lucky, right place, right time guy. So I'm going to give him alpha beta. That's a real British thing. Isn't
Okay.
it? Yeah.
Okay, a little bit of both then. No, you mentioned in the book that SoftBank comes from this juxtaposition of software, which is what he's interested in, and the solidity of a bank to give the impression that your money is safe. When you think about something like SoftBank, then I want to come to the Vision Fund that you teed up. Should we think of it as kind of a closed-in fund of Masa's visions and creations? The reason I ask is you have in the book a fascinating story of his presenting to Warren Buffett, who is about as opposite a human being as could be from Masayoshi Son. He too has a closed-in fund, Berkshire Hathaway, that's very, very famous. How do you explain Buffett, Son, that conversation, how it goes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I sound like somebody in the White House.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Except you didn't ask 3 questions, like most of the CNN correspondents, but there we are.
Yeah.
Couldn't resist that. So just worth saying something about the SoftBank structure before I answer directly the Warren Buffett question. SoftBank Group is a holding company, but underneath this are real businesses, right? Real important businesses like SoftBank Mobile, right? Or the e-commerce side, which was Yahoo Japan, spun out of Yahoo. These make money, they're real things. The SoftBank holding company has investments in up to 500 companies. I mean, it's a sort of investment outfit. It's like covering a chessboard. So there's also debt held in the subsidiaries. There's some in the holding companies, but there's also correlations. So it's very complicated, quite opaque. You have to read a lot of the notes. That's the first point to make. The second, talk about Buffett. So as I understand this conversation, I mean, just think about it, by the way. Masayoshi Son comes with his honchos, his SoftBank Vision Fund people, including the famed Rajiv Misra, ex-Deutsche Bank, running the Vision Fund. They literally fly from Tokyo to Omaha. Long way to go, and they get a tour of 20 minutes and a conversation which lasts about 15 to 20 minutes, and Mr. Buffett essentially isn't interested, and they fly home. They looked at how, the way I describe this is, it's the search for permanent capital. Basically, if you've got strong income streams, like in the insurance business, maybe you can use that as a sort of lever for raising more capital, right? Because you've got that steady income stream off the premiums, put simply. Now, Masa is often described as the Warren Buffett of Japan, but he is nowhere near like Warren Buffett, who believes in solid, railways.
Right, Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola, consumer brands. Masa's not into that at all. He's into high-tech gambles. So this is a very different, very, very different model. But what he did do, and this is a rather long answer to your question, Glenn, so I apologize, but what he also did after talking with Mr. Buffett, he then went to AXA, the insurance company. And they even looked at Aviva in the UK because they were looking at buying an insurance company to get to pursue that model.
Well, KKR and Apollo have figured that out today, so this game is
still
there.
Apollo, Athene, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to take you back to the story about his being the richest man in the world for 3 days. It's about 3 days longer than I've ever been the richest man in the world. So I was quite taken with that. And on February 15th, 2000, the date you chronicle in the book, the stock price peaks at 198,000 yen. That's the date in which he's richer than Bill Gates, who at the time was the richest person in the world. 11 months later, not so long in time, his wealth had dropped by 96%, yet he seems quite chipper the way you describe it. How does that work? Walk us through that time path. He loses 96% of his wealth. How does he dust himself off and get back up?
He had assets in the United States that he bought during the dot-com bubble with his stake in Yahoo, because as you rightly said, he had more than 30% of Yahoo. Yahoo stock in the late 90s going like that, which allows him to sell a little bit and then invest in all these other dot-com properties, some which gone out, were going up, some of which he managed to get through his IPO machine, further enhancing returns. But with the dot-com correction and the popping of the bubble, he does it. He's almost wiped out, but he still has some assets. So he tells his associate, Ron Fisher, just sell. Now he can get some reasonable prices. They're not all .com. There was Ziff Davis, which was a serious computer publishing, magazine publishing business. He can get some money from that. And then he's, crucially, the Japanese banks are not going to pull the plug. I have a fascinating, I think, interchange with one of the guys who's Masa's big rival. He's a brilliant businessman called Tadashi Yanai, who was the founder of fast retailing, the Uniqlo brand. Yanai goes on the board of SoftBank after that, after the popping of the bubble. And Yanai said to me, basically, we couldn't afford to let Masa go down because it would have been a tremendous blow to Japanese prestige. This guy was the icon. He was the dynamic entrepreneur. So I thought I'd go on the board to help him and look after him a bit. And so therefore there was a certain amount of goodwill. Japanese banks, as you say, going bankrupt in Japan is quite hard. And also he had these are still record low interest rates because of the popping of the real estate bubble in 1980s. So late 80s and 90s. So for all these reasons, there are some forces, bigger forces than the pure individual, that are keeping SoftBank and Masa afloat. And he pivots to broadband, gets the money, takes on NTT, and Bob's your uncle.
And how does he pull off the Vision Fund? That's an extraordinary amount of money, including from some sovereigns like the Saudi royal family. How does he pull this off?
Well, he's looking for capital because he's got bored with the telecoms business. Sprint is a real problem, but he's got somebody, this Marcelo Clary, Bolivian American, to try and turn that around, but it's hard slog, it's hard sledding. So he's looking around, saying, where can I get capital? And at this point, this figure of Rajiv Misra, the ex-Deutsche Bank guy, says, I can introduce you to a couple of people who've got great connections in the Gulf. And that's where the money is. Now here and I think this speaks to Masa's intelligence, there's a convergence of interest between Masa, the capital-hungry investor, and Mohammed bin Salman, initially Deputy Crown Prince, but then Crown Prince, de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, who in 2016, and I know this, I heard this personally because I interviewed MBS in Riyadh in November 2015, where we heard about his big plan to transform the Saudi Arabian economy, reduce dependency on the oil, and bring in technology, etc. So this young ruler looks at Masa. Masa says, I can get you into the tech community. I can introduce you here. Here are great investments. They've already played around a bit with Uber and things. So this is what happens. Now, Masa likes to say, and he told David Rubenstein this, I persuaded MBS to give me 45 billion in 45 minutes. By the way, that went down, that TV interview went down very badly in Riyadh because it looks like dumb money, right? In fact, there was, and I document this in the book, there was quite a lot of diplomatic maneuvering, etc., to tee up that meeting in Tokyo before they got the 45 billion. And even when they did get the 45 billion, there was a lot of negotiation about how it would be spent. But essentially, there's a convergence of interest, which explains how they were prepared to get that amount of money.
Well, you describe episodes like that and others where he takes these dramatic steps. Here, we've just seen him back. Was the early with his photo ops with President Trump after his inauguration. The Japanese Prime Minister has yet to show up, but Masayoshi Son is there. How is he do you think he'll pull off this Stargate option that he's doing with OpenAI, the supposed raising of $500 billion?
I'll come to Stargate in a minute, but just remember that there is a perfect mirror image of the meeting which Masa had at Mar-a-Lago. By the way, golf, that's the other thing. Key thing for all his connections. He plays good round of golf. And there's a lot of people who've got a lot of money or power who like golf. So there's a bit of a connection there. But in December 2016, thanks to Steve Schwarzman and Sheldon Adelson, the Las Vegas casino billionaire, he gets a meeting with President-elect Trump in Trump Tower. And I described the meeting. And essentially, they say, keep it simple. Just, 50 billion, 50,000 jobs. Okay. So he goes in and you can pretend to be Donald Trump.
That would be hard, but I'll try.
I'll try. and he says, 50,000 jobs, 50 billion. And Trump said, wow, is that real? Can we tweet about this? He's very excited. The meeting really doesn't go on for very long. But then President-elect Trump goes to his private bathroom just to straighten up before going down to the TV cameras below at Trump Tower. And he adjusts his tie, gets the pin right, and then just combs his hair like this. Then he looks at Masa outside and says, this is the way you do it. But the thing is, Masa doesn't have any hair. So it's a really surreal exchange. That's the tabloid story. The serious bit is Stargate. So maybe two observations. First, I know that Masa has been plotting this for at least 2.5 years. Everybody was writing him off after the COVID pandemic. The stock had gone to hell. He lost a lot of money on futures options trading, but he was planning his comeback and around AI. And he spotted, number one, there's tremendous demand for energy to get the computing power for AI. Number two, I haven't got my AI investments right in deep AI. I've got to get close to Sam Altman, and we're going to do something together. And as a result of this, you saw this 100 billion initially in December, and now he's talking 500. I think that Elon Musk is wrong to say they don't have all the money. He does have quite a bit of money. I think they've lined up some institutional support. The question now is, given what we've seen in the markets with the DeepSeek, is this rendered redundant, or is he got its timing completely wrong? Is he technologically, out of sync? And I take a slightly more optimistic view that this is just going to increase competition, increase the pace of innovation, and there's still room for opportunities. And that Masa is still going to be placing himself through the development of chips, through energy data centers. He's still going to be there, present in his Forrest Gump fashion.
Well, we talked about some of the entrepreneurs that he's dealt with, but he also had to deal with Elliott, the activist investor, when he sort of hit the skids at one point. And talk to us a little bit about that. That's an entirely different dynamic of persuasion.
Just hilarious story, hilarious, serious story where essentially Elliott's looking at SoftBank's assets under control or investments, serious mobile business, and then they're looking at the stock price, and there's a conglomerate discount. And this has existed, by the way, for quite a long time. The SoftBank share price does not reflect the value of the underlying assets. So they see an opportunity. They sound him out. And I have the first meeting, they essentially say, you could easily raise the share price if you just clean up your board, improve the quality of the board. It's all, it's got no diversity, no real independent directors. Second, you do a big buyback. And third, you streamline some asset. You can sell some things. All that, and the share price will just go up. And you can be as good as Mark Zuckerberg or Warren Buffett. And literally, Masa says, but I'm not like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. I'm like Napoleon. I'm like Genghis Khan or Emperor Qin, the Great Wall of China. I'm an empire builder. Don't come with it. So literally, one of the guys in the meeting said we went back on the plane and we go, damn, we just didn't build our, bring our Napoleon presentation, on our cards. Anyway, they went back. They got in. Share price went out. Then they got back out. They tried to sort of have some influence over his investing. It didn't work, so they came back again, just a few months ago. So it was a sort of win-win, but not a big win-win.
Now, before I get to a couple more general questions, one more on Masa, the man. You have a great scene toward the end of the book where you describe effectively being taken into his lair. So for the audience, if you haven't had a chance to look at the book yet, imagine a tall office building and a Xanadu tucked away on a high floor. Tell us about it.
Well, I've heard from various people that Masa had this private headquarters where he entertains guests. And one of the things he does is he always presents them with top sushi, which his chef buys at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And it's very expensive. Some people say $30,000 or so if it's top. So I'm thinking I've got to find a way of somehow getting into the inner sanctum to see this, but I don't want to ask because I don't want to be in the demandeur role. Anyway, at the end of this last interview, we wrapped up, we shook hands, and then he said, I want to show you something. And he opened these doors, and there, as Glenn's saying, there's this, it's Xanadu meets Kyoto, because there are 3 rock pools on the 27th or 37th floor of this skyscraper, and they're perfectly designed. There are trees, the leaves painted individually with gold tint. It's an extraordinary thing, plus Japanese art, and of course, the Domaine Romani Conti wine, which is also $8,000 a bottle or so. There's 4 bottles there by the dining table. And he took me around there, and then he said, you can't write a word about this. I'm thinking, what? So I said, why not? And he said, because no journalist has ever been in this sanctum. And I then, without batting an eyelid, said, but I'm not a journalist, I'm an author. Which is kind of cheeky, but I got away with it.
But did you get a glass of Romagné Saint-Favant?
I would really have loved to have had that, but they had not been uncorked.
I see. Well,
so I didn't.
C'est dommage. Okay, so
Dommage.
If we think about Masa more generally, what do you take from all your experience with him about lessons for risk-taking in the economy and for disruptors? So now we have Mark Zuckerberg, who says we need more masculinity in business. And I suppose he means risk-taking, I'm not quite sure. What do you take from the lessons of Masa Son? Do we need more Masa Sons, or is he just an interesting sui generis case study?
We don't need too many Masa Sons.
Okay.
Because the financial system probably couldn't sustain it. But Japan definitely needs some Masa. He's been very good for Japan. He has been an agent of disruption. And I think in general, if you go to Silicon Valley, obviously I think I went 6, 7 times, he's not very popular there because he came in, he splashed money around. Mike Moritz at Sequoia described him as like Kim Jong-un with his nuclear missiles. I mean, essentially, he bust the party up. And he definitely overpaid, inflated values and stuff like that. But I think we should take away this notion of, you know, there's sensible risk taking, there's good risk taking, there's good failure, and he's done that and come back. It's an extraordinary story about entrepreneurial resilience. I think we should value the notion that outsiders can often be fantastic agents of change. I think we can say his record on recruitment is mixed. We can raise some questions maybe about succession. I mean, succession is, to my mind, one of the challenges for great leaders. If in business, you should think about succession responsibly. I certainly did when I was the editor. So we don't know what's going to happen. Will SoftBank endure? He talks about SoftBank enduring for 300 years. I mean, literally says this. But what's SoftBank without Masa? What will happen? Will it be a breakup? But overall, I would say that having studied this man and interviewed him 4 times over a period of 3+ years, I would give it a thumbs up. I would be positive about him as an agent of change and a serious investor who spotted great opportunities and shown a high degree of creativity.
Some of the disruptor and outsider themes you mentioned remind me of a man who was inaugurated last week as President of the United States. Do you see some parallels? Is there a metaphor here from Son's approach to business to a disruptor in politics?
Well, they are the 2 comeback kids. I mean, Donald Trump, whatever you think of his policies or character or anything, you cannot deny that he's come back when everybody wrote him off, almost everybody, after January the 6th. And maybe some people would say quite rightly, given what happened. But he's come back. He is the dominant figure in the world stage. Again, we need to see how this plays out. What will it look like in 6 months? But he has staged an enormous comeback. And the similarity with Masa is Masa's probably staged 5 comebacks when people have completely rung him up, completely written him off. I think that another parallel is that, disruption, and they're both powerful disruptors. Is Donald Trump the same kind of outsider? Not really, unless you think that coming from Queens makes you an outsider in Manhattan. Maybe
It does actually,
Yeah.
but that's another story.
I didn't want to get too.
That's another story. I'm from the
questioning
rural
your-
South, so I can say that. But,
Okay. I'm told that bridge is a big deal.
yeah. So one last question for me, and I'd love to take questions from the audience. As Barbara said when she was introducing you, you've written a lot and interviewed many sort of big public figures, statesmen, political leaders. How different is it to sit down, talk with, write about a technocrat, a politician, as opposed to a figure like Masa Son?
Well, Masa Son is extremely elusive. He's very difficult to track down. It took a lot of somebody. I actually said to a distinguished Indian American investor, I can't believe this. I mean, it's harder, I think, than stalking a Bengali tiger. And this chap said, in that case, Mr. Barber, I would bring a goat.
Yeah, yeah.
So getting to Masayoshi Son, and I went to Tokyo twice, and his people said, he's too busy. I said, well, I've come all the way from London. They said, nice weather, what's the problem? So I had to kind of swallow my pride a bit there and get to understand, just persist. With Masayoshi Son, it was very important to deliver a message. Look, this isn't an assassination. This isn't a hit. I'm not interested in doing caricatures. I've done my homework. And actually that first snub was actually quite good because I told them, I'm just now going to do my homework. I'm going to Kyushu, going to his home visit. I'm going to visit all his schools. I'm going to go to Busan, Korea. I'm just going to do my work. And by that, when I actually did sit down with him, I was well prepared and surprised him with the level of knowledge. So you can turn that to advantage. I think I would draw a parallel, like it's a guarded parallel, Glenn. But when I interviewed President Putin in Moscow, I did offer some advice to Tucker Carlson, but for some reason he didn't really listen. But I did my preparation, and I asked two individuals that I knew who I thought could be really helpful, because I really wanted to be sure that I would start the interview well. And Bob Zoellick was one, and Bill Burns was the other, because Bill Burns had been in Moscow, and these people had spent face time. They'd seen Putin, and the one thing they said is, show respect at the beginning. Don't just, if you convey that, you don't interrupt him, you look at him, then this interview can then proceed. You can leave the harder questions for later. And I just did a twist. I just spoke to him in German at the beginning, because just to sort of say, I know you're a KGB agent, I speak German.
Well, yes, I should have said to all of you, he read German
Yeah.
in
And by the way, his
college.
German is outstandingly good. I mean, it's faultless.